Hi, everybody. This is Professor Kalabata, and I just wanted to post a video response to the discussion that you guys had on our comprehension discussion board for Module 1. So I thought you guys did a pretty good job posting your comments and talking to each other by posting replies to each other's answers. And I just wanted to touch on a couple of things I saw you guys talking about. And some of these ideas kind of repeat some of the ideas that we've already talked about, and maybe I'll also expand on a couple. So I think you guys did a pretty good job at identifying this central question. I guess the question is, when is it acceptable to separate? Um, as a country, we've grown to the point where American society uh, seems to feel that it's not acceptable to segregate. This mandated separation is no longer considered something that is culturally acceptable in American society. The thing that our society is dealing with now is, when is it acceptable to, of one's own free will, to separate from the larger group? And when should the larger group be accepting of that? So it did seem like you guys did a good job at identifying some of the criteria to decide when is that acceptable and when is it not acceptable. When is it acceptable for a smaller group to separate itself from the larger group? And when is it necessary for the larger group to accept that separation? Because the larger group doesn't necessarily have to accept that. And it seemed like one of the things you guys were talking about was the power dynamic. Look at the power. Who has more power and who has less power? And how does that play out? So, for instance, I think it was Jakim Allah. I'm sorry if I'm screwing up your name, but you put an interesting post. You said one of the things you said in one of your answers was there were white students who wanted to attend the black prom, as well as straight people who wanted to attend gay bars. If white people can attend black proms, but black people cannot attend white proms, there's an issue of privilege and racism still. So yeah, that was a good observation. The article does seem to point out that you notice the white students seemed to have more freedom of movement than the black students. And that's an important observation to make, because it illustrates how there's this cultural system. There's a set of rules that our culture gives us that gives some people more power and other people less power. And you can see that power dynamic playing out in freedom of movement. Who has freedom of movement? Who has the freedom to go to more places, and who has less freedom to go to as many places as the other people? So, um, uh, if people with, it does seem as though as a society, we're kind of getting to the point where we are willing to accept that if a group of people wants to separate themselves to some extent, and that group of people has less power, and they also have a history of being abused, the larger group seems to accept to some extent that it's acceptable for those people to separate themselves to some extent. Uh, because I guess, why is that? Because they want to have a safe place. Again, we talked about this. It's all about people with less power wanting their own place or their own organization, because they're trying to create a safe place where they can relax and be assured of being free from harm. And it can also function as a tool for organizing. Maybe they want to band together to help each other improve their position in life because they're living with a cultural system that treats them badly. And I think it does seem like, to some extent, American society is willing to accept that if people have a history of being abused and they have less power and they want to have their own place where they can feel safe and they can organize, then to some extent American society is willing to accept that. Uh, I guess there are some complications that I noticed some of you were talking about. I'll talk about that in just a second. Uh, but there's also the issue of people with more power wanting to have their own space. And there does seem to be an understanding that um, that's a bit more complicated because when people with more power want their own place, when they want to separate, it doesn't seem like it's the same thing as people with less power wanting to separate. Because with people with less power want to separate, like I said, a lot of these posts that you guys put on our discussion board seemed to be aware of the fact that people with less power wanting to separate, it's about them wanting to have a safe place, to preserve identity, to be free from harm, to have a tool so they can organize. When people with more power want their own place, it does seem to be more of a bit more of a power grab. There's something a little bit more uncomfortable about that. It's usually about them wanting to reinforce that system of inequality so that they can preserve a privileged position for themselves. So, for instance, look at gender. If there's some sort of feminist organization that is trying to elevate the position of women, for instance, in the workplace, maybe people aren't going to have a lot of uncomfortable feelings about that. But if there's a group of men that want to create an all-male organization for themselves, that sort of reminds us of these older organizations in the past where there would be these all-male clubs where men would get together and smoke cigars, and it was really all about a bunch of men wanting to maintain a position of male privilege for themselves. So there are some obvious examples like that. In real life, sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult to see exactly, what are people trying to do. But in general, that seems to be a dynamic that many people seem to be aware of. People with more power wanting their own place, that can be a little bit more frightening because it does seem to be reinforcing a system of inequality. People with less power wanting their own place, I get the impression people are a little bit more accepting of that because they understand people with less power who have a history of being abused want to have their own space to feel free from harm. Um, it was interesting, some of the things you guys were talking about. There was this question that seemed to pop up a couple of times that maybe, yeah, people with less power wanting their own space, that's acceptable, but how long do you do that? That's another question. Because if we're striving for everybody being able to have the same freedom in society, then at a certain point, these places will become obsolete, right? Um, for instance, like with gay bars or gay clubs, um, if we're striving for a time when people are going to be treated as equal human beings, then at a certain point, gay or transgender people presumably aren't going to need places where they can all hang out together and and feel free from harm. And I did see that a couple of times. In fact, it was interesting. I had this discussion in a face-to-face class this last year before the pandemic happened. And there does seem to be a generational divide within the LGBT community. I get the impression I'm not a member of the LGBT community myself, so I can only talk about what I've heard. Um, but I get the impression with older LGBT people, they seem to put more importance on having these safe spaces. Whereas when I hear younger LGBT people talk, there seems to be a bit more of a discussion about whether or not the idea of having gay bars and gay clubs is a little bit more outdated. Um, uh, there seems to be a bit more of a state of mind like, I don't really care if a bunch of straight people come into my gay club, who cares? Um, so I don't know, it's interesting, but there seems to be a bit more of a cultural divide there. So um, uh, but okay. I think, let's see, one more issue that seemed to come up was uh, what are the negative things that can happen when people decide to isolate themselves? If we've accepted the fact that people with less power and who have a history of being abused, if it's acceptable for them to do some sort of social isolation, meaning they're going to have their own club or their own organization, if that's acceptable to some extent, what are the possible negative things that can happen? Um, Can isolating oneself from others be unhealthy? And the answer is yes, it can be. I mean, I didn't have you read any scientific articles on this, but it has been proven that interacting with other people that are different than oneself has the effect of making a person more accepting and more open-minded. It also has the effect of giving people skills, uh, making people more tolerant of other people that are different than themselves, which has the effect of building skills necessary for conflict resolution. So, scientifically, yes, it has been proven interacting with other people that are different than yourself will make you a more sophisticated and more open minded and more accepting person. And so when people choose to isolate themselves, yes, there can be some unhealthy things that can happen. Let me see. One of the posts, Amani Abdeljawad, again, I'm sorry if I'm screwing up your name. If we were in class together, you could correct me. But one of the things you wrote, let's see, um, I believe engaging in separatism, regardless of the community, can be a good method for the individuals within it to preserve their culture and traditions. However, I also believe that caution should be used in these instances. From experiences within my own communities, isolation can often turn to insulation and from there progress to the point of becoming an echo chamber. Yeah, so once a group has reached echo chamber status, it becomes far easier for extreme ideologies to take hold. So, yeah, so I haven't talked about with you what an echo chamber is. It looks like some of you were already aware of what it is. In English 1B, I go into a bit more detail about that, about what an echo chamber is. But just very quickly, if you're not aware of what this term means, the term echo chamber means a group of people that are isolated and you have the same ideas circling around in that community. So, first of all, an echo. What is an echo? An echo is where you say something and your voice bounces off of something, and then your voice comes back to you. So you say something, and then the same thing that you said comes back to you. A chamber is an isolated uh, an isolated place, and so the term echo chamber means somebody being in an isolated place and saying something and having the same thing bounce back to them. So when people use the term echo chamber, it's referring to a situation where you have a community of people where everybody thinks the same thing. And so when they talk to each other, one person says something and the other person that they're talking to kind of just repeats the same opinion. So they're not really discussing or debating anything. They're not exploring new ideas. They're kind of just giving each other affirmation of each other's ideas. You have the same ideas circling around in the community. So instead of having new ideas coming in and having people being exposed to new ideas, and that's how your ideas grow. It's when you get exposed to other ideas that are not familiar to you. You get this echo chamber effect, and so it tends to create a community that is less sophisticated and less aware, and perhaps sometimes also uh, more hostile towards people outside the group. So that's certainly a danger, So it's an interesting discussion. When is it acceptable and when is it not? When is it acceptable for a group to isolate themselves and or to have safe spaces? And it seems like we're all sort of on the same page of accepting that sometimes if people have less power and there's a history of being abused, that we're all willing to accept some level of separation if those people want to have a safe space for themselves. But at the same time, how much is okay and how much is too much? And how long do people do that for? So, you know, um, that's where it becomes a bit more complicated and debatable. I think this is why, for instance, going back to the LGBT example again, you see examples around the country of these gay student organizations, just like here at Chaffey College. We have an organization like that as well. And these organizations develop in order to try to advocate for gay and transgender people. But at the same time, in the recent years, I've seen a lot of these groups begin to call themselves, instead of calling themselves, like for instance, like the gay student group, they'll call themselves like the Gay Straight Alliance, right? So in their name and in their behavior, they're trying to create this idea that it's not just it is a group that's trying to improve things for gay and transgender people, but they're doing it by trying to create connections with other people, right? So it's not just the gay group, it's the Gay Straight Alliance, or they'll use the term coalition or something, promoting the idea that it's different groups of people coming together and working together to try to solve a problem. Um, so so yeah, okay. So anyways, you guys did a pretty good job at identifying a lot of these issues. Pretty good posts. And people have been talking to me the past couple of days through email and coming to my office hours and asking me about the essay assignment and in general what I've seen so far. The couple of people I've talked to, it looks like you guys are on the right track. So the essay assignment is asking you to choose some aspect of your life and tell us how integrated or not integrated that particular part of your life is. And I would say try to keep yourself on track. What you want to do is you want to focus on a particular place or some particular aspect of your life. So try to stay focused on that, right? A dance club you like to go to, a student group you're a member of, or a place where you like to hang out. It might just be. I was talking to somebody. It might just be a place where you like to sit and have lunch, right? That place outside the cafeteria where everybody sits and hangs out. How integrated or not integrated is that physical space? So try to be specific with some particular aspect of your life, a particular place, a particular group, and then remember that identity is built in layers. So we all have different layers of our identity: race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and you want to pick one slice of identity. Okay, so pick one of those things. Try to focus on one of them: gender identity, or sexual orientation, or religion, or whatever. So you're picking a particular place or a particular organization, and you're picking a particular slice of identity. So, do people of different genders, hang out with each other out in the lunch area outside of the cafeteria, right? Or do people of different racial groups, maybe a class you took last year, did people of different racial groups, were they all sitting together and hanging out together in the class, or did the class seem a little bit more racially segregated because that's just what people did? And is that okay, or is it not okay? Is there a dance club you like to go to? And do people of different sexual orientations, all hang out together in that particular dance club, or whatever? So a particular place, some aspect of your life, and a particular slice of identity. Try to stay focused on that. And so, anyways, I'll be in office hours again tomorrow. Sorry, I'm making this video on Monday, the 18th, Martin Luther King Day. How appropriate. I didn't plan it that way, but it just happened. And I'll be in office hours again this week. If you need any help, call or email me. Okay, see you guys.